Okay. So field boundary assessments. So these are the same for both scorecards, for the MSL and for the low input grassland. And I suppose this presentation, it is mostly, well, it contains a lot of photographs which is showing the different conditions of hedgerows and stone walls. So it's quite useful as a reference document to refer back to, and for helping to see what to recognise and to get familiar with the conditions of the various boundary features, well, hedgerows and walls. So what I'm going to cover is how to record field margins, how to record field boundaries, how to condition assess field boundaries, and how to record negative indicators throughout the boundaries and margins. So we are rewarding in both of these questions. You see the matrix that I showed you before that GLAMS automatically calculates for you based on the density of field margins per hectare. And we do the same sort of matrix to reward farmers for the density of field boundaries per hectare. And that's we're including dry stone walls and hedgerows in good condition in those assessments. But why do we want to reward the density of field margins and these features, and why is it so important? Well, it's really obvious when you see this picture, and it's just a really lovely diagram that was given to me by an ecologist in the National Parks and Wildlife Service. But if you see the top photograph, and it's obviously a very diverse, like heterogeneous landscape with mixed farming and lots of different features within their different field sizes and shapes, and there's a stream and lots of bushes and trees and woodlands and different farming going on. And then to the right you can see the large amount of wildlife and species that are associated with a landscape like this, everything from large mammals to small mammals and birds and amphibians and insects and arthropods. And it's it's a much healthier looking ecosystem than as you move further down. So then in the next one, and you can see there's some degree of simplification of the landscape here, in that there's some field boundaries have been removed. There's still some woodland there in the stream, but some field boundaries removed, some fields enlarged, and probably a bit less diversification in farming too. So just more of the same sort of crops being grown, if you like. And you could see the orange boxes there blanked out show that some species have been lost compared with the above scenario. And then moving down to the bottom scenario, it's really poor altogether for wildlife. And as you can imagine, but it's quite striking to see just how many orange boxes are filled with this scenario. So it's been a complete simplification of the landscape, and with this no woodland left, a single bush standing there, and the stream that was in the previous two has been canalized. It's no longer a natural stream. No field boundaries, and just sort of a monoculture of farming with maybe just one or two crop types sown there. So it does have a large impact then on the biodiversity in that landscape too. So the greater the amount of margins and hedgerows and stone walls in REAP, then the greater the reward that would be in terms of your score and payment. So the boundaries question then, or the field margins question, is on the low input grassland scorecard. It is question 5, and it's question 3 on the mixed species lay, multi-species lay scorecard. And it's asking to map all fenced field margins present. So it's the same as what I showed you before, is that when you're in the field and you've got your paper map there, you literally just mark on with marker where there are field boundaries and the widths of those. You'd also mark on, when you're marking on the boundary features as well, you'd mark on if there's a watercourse there, and GLAMS does the rest for you. But for the low input grassland scorecard, all margins have to be fenced unless a combined score of 35 is achieved in questions 1 and 2. So questions 1 and 2 is how many positive indicator species are present in the field. And question 2 is what is the cover of those positive indicator species in the field. So if the answers to both of those add up to greater than 35, that is a very good indication to us that you are in a semi-natural field, in that the management of the field doesn't, that there isn't any separate management required for the margin areas because the field is managed so extensively. However, in MSL, a multi-species lay field, that because it's a crop that's been sown, and we're looking to fence these margins for the benefit of pollinators, all field margins must be fenced, but there can be temporary fences used, as Jerome indicated. And I've explained this already for the MSL, exactly the same for the low input grassland. But in the low input grassland, you have only just 3 margin width options. So you have a 1, 2, or 3 meter margin that you can put in. And the way that you calculate the density of those per hectare, you don't need to do that as an advisor. You just need to draw them on a map, and GLAMS will do it for you. But in this scenario, if you were to work it out, is those two margins, 2 meter margins on 2 sides of the field. One is 300 meters long, the other is 205 meters long. 505 meters divided by the area of the field gives you a density of 202 meters per hectare. And you can see there, it's on the scorecard as well, but you don't need to work it out and say GLAMS does this for you. But the 202 places you in the middle bracket. So in the middle bracket, you're either going to get marks of 15, 20, or 25. And because they're 2 meter margins, then you're getting marks of 20. And then in the low input grassland card, if one of those margins had been beside a water course, you would get another 5 marks. So you get 25 marks for that question. So 5 marks up to it must be also that the length of the boundary must meet the minimum. So the minimum density per hectare is 50 meters per hectare. And it's subject to a maximum of 30 points for this question. Or if you're in MSL, there's 10 bonus points for a margin beside a watercourse, up to a maximum of 60 marks being awarded for that question in total. So I think I didn't explain this well yesterday, so I just wanted to reiterate it, so that a watercourse for the purposes of marking in boundary features in REAP, and also for determining whether that bonus payment will apply for having a margin beside a watercourse. Well, it's obviously any natural stream or river, but in addition to that, it's a drainage ditch. And but the drainage ditch must hold water at some point during every year, so that a drainage ditch that is completely dry and it's very obvious that it's dry, it's scrubbed over, or it's full of brambles, etc., they will not be eligible to be called a water course and won't avail of these extra marks for having a margin beside them. Then we'll need, so you log on to Agrisnap to take a photo of each margin type. In the type I've just shown you, the field with 2 meter margins, 1 photo for Agrisnap is sufficient of one of those margins because they're both of the same margin width. Now the next question, then we're moving on to boundary features. I'm not finished talking about margins for now. So in the field boundary features, this is the same question on the low input grassland scorecard as the multi-species lay scorecard. So it's question 6 on the low input grassland scorecard. and it is question 4 on the MSL scorecard, but it is exactly the same in both. So what we're asking to do is to mark on a paper map all field boundary features. So that's earth banks, drainage ditches, wire and post and rail fences, water courses, hedgerows and tree lines, dry stone walls, and other features. So I've just shown it here for you as an example, that if there is, so for hedgerows and stone walls, you've also got to determine whether they are in condition A, B, or C, and I'll be going through that in detail now in a minute. But when you draw these on the map in the field, you draw them on, but you also say whether it's A, B, or C. Now you only have to say whether it's A, B, or C for a hedgerow or stone wall. You don't have to say that for a water course or for a post and wire fence or for a ditch or any other feature, just for hedgerows and stone walls. But after you've marked on, so in this field, you can say, well, it's all hedgerows all the way around. So you've got hedgerows condition C there in the red, and hedgerows condition B for the blue, and hedgerows in condition A for the yellow. But if you can see underneath at the bottom of the field, I have a blue line marked in as well, because if there's a water course in the field, you need to mark that on the map as well, a water course or a drainage ditch. And GLAMS automatically calculates the density of these per hectare for you, similar matrix to what I showed already. It depends on the density per hectare, but you don't have to worry about the density per hectare. GLAMS will automatically do it for you, that if all of those field boundaries that were in condition A, or the hedgerows that were marked in condition A and B, they're added, the lengths of those are added in GLAMS, and if the lengths of those divided by the area of the field fall into one of these 3 categories, either the 40 to 100 meters, you get a score of 5, 100 to 160, a score of 10, or over 160 meters per hectare, you get a score of 15 for that question. So talk about stone walls first. It's very easy assessment, so they're either in good condition or they're not. So you're getting awarded marks, and the same marks whether it's in condition A or condition B, and there's no marks associated with stone walls in condition C. These diagrams are on the scorecard as well. Condition A is obviously it's stock proof in really good condition, or there can be some minor defects associated with it. And with B, there could be some signs of advancing or potential deterioration, but it's still largely a stock proof wall. And condition C is either completely derelict or it's going towards being derelict. It's no longer stock proof, or it could be just a heap of stones lying on the ground. That would be condition C2. So the next lot of slides are just some photographs for reference, really. That's obviously an A-type stone wall. Obviously, we're talking about dry stone walls here. So stone walls that are repaired with mortar or cement are not included. It's they have to be dry stone walls. So another example of stone walls in condition A. You can see that the field is the structure of the field is not very good. It's becoming completely scrubbed over, and the wall it will become engulfed there as well with either bracken or bramble. I can't see which it is, but at the moment the wall is still structurally sound in condition A. And a mixture of all types here, with condition C in the foreground and some intermediate in the midground, and some good condition stone walls, condition A in the background. Condition A along both sides of this road, but it's certainly along the right side of the road, and the left. It's hard to see if that if the wall is completely engulfed, as I'll show you in some later photographs. It's completely taken over and you can't see the wall, but there's a wall underneath, but if you can't see it, it's not getting marked in condition A, it'll be in condition C. very low wall, but it's like it's obviously extremely old and is still standing, and it's been protected there by the fence around it, and it hasn't collapsed. It's just an old heritage feature. That's condition A. These walls, a lot of ivy grown on them. They're not being maintained really, but at the moment that they are still structurally sound, so still in condition A. This one is getting towards dereliction in condition B. It's hard to tell with this one. In the foreground, it's in good condition, but the general length of the wall along that entire lane is it's not really in structurally good condition. It's not really been managed, and it's not going to be stock proofs in condition B. Another one in condition B, and of course the farmer can easily rectify this situation between years to get into condition A for next year, but there is equal marks going for A and B. Yeah, a wall is completely overgrown with hedgerow on top of it, and it's no longer featuring as a stone wall. It's condition C. Same with these, and this one, and these. It's condition C. There's a stone wall might be standing behind there, but I can't tell whether it is or whether it isn't. And that see all that scrub that's overgrowing on the wall, you could think, well, is that a hedge, or is it a stone wall? Well, it's neither. It's not a hedgerow because it's not planted. A hedgerow is a planted line of shrubs. What's growing there is bramble, and the bramble is self-seeded there. It was never a planted hedge, and it's not eligible as a hedgerow. Condition C for stone wall. Another view of the same wall. And this obviously just remnants of stone wall, also condition C. So the hedgerow management is a little bit more complicated to try to work out, what you're dealing with and what you're looking at, because they're like every single hedgerow is different. Every single one you look at in the country is different, and trying to categorize them into three simple categories is very difficult. And as well as that hedgerows, if you're trying to assess the structure of a hedgerow, it's easier to do so in the winter time. And of course, these surveys, you'll be all going out to assess hedgerows in the summertime when they all look better than they are. When they're all in full leaf, it can disguise the fact that they're fairly ruined and not really being maintained. But we really simplified it into just these three categories. And what we're trying to do here is just simply to disincentivize poor management. And the poor management is just simply by over trimming. So if a hedge is unmanaged and it's let to grow wild, well, then you get full marks for that. Or if it's well maintained and well managed, but still of a reasonable height, and then it's full marks for that as well. So, but for condition A is dense, well managed, and over 2 meters tall. Condition B, it be tall and outgrown, is developed into a tree line, or it could just be a tree line by itself rather than being a hedge. It could be an actual tree line against as a field boundary. And condition C, it'd be those over trimmed ones, less than 1.5 meters tall. They can have significant gaps. There are some rules for assessing hedgerows. So it's to not count the height of the hedge bank. That's just a simple diagram I'll show you in the next slide. Gaps over 20 meters shouldn't be recorded. So we're not asking you to go out into the field and taking measurement tapes with you or anything to be able to determine the exact lengths of field boundaries, but that if you can measure by feet really, and if there are gaps over what you consider to be over, or you're suspicious of being around 20 meters or more than that, they shouldn't be recorded. So if you're drawing a line on a map of that boundary feature, a line along the whole length of the boundary feature, you'd obviously put a gap there or an X or something, so that when you go on to GLAMs, that you are leaving that gap out in when you're measuring in GLAMs, so the GLAMs can measure accordingly. So any changes in hedge condition over 20 meters should be marked on the map. If it's less than 20 meters, well, then you just mark the dominant condition type along that boundary. So if you'd a hedgerow that was in condition A, and then like there was a gap or there was something different happening for 15 meters, it was in condition C or it was in condition B, or there was a gap there or something for 15 meters, well, you can just mark the whole hedgerow as being condition A. And as I said, with stone walls, a line of bramble is not a hedge. And that's also, we're showing you a video. There's a little break after this presentation, and it's I think it's a 20-minute break, but during that there's a 9-minute video of me scoring a field, and in that field, one of the boundaries in it is a line of bramble. A line of bramble is not a hedge. And if farmers have any newly planted hedgerows in good condition, you can mark those as condition A. So this is just to say that, like, we're measuring height. You're not measuring from the ground. You're measuring from where the base of where the hedgerow was planted. So just some of the value of the different parts of a hedge and why the different parts of a hedge are important. So there's 7 different parts here that are marked. So the hedgerow trees, and like you probably all know that hedgerow trees are really important. And this has been, management advice from Teagasc, and management advice nationally generally is to plant a tree in every so many meters of hedgerow. And for our REAP complementary actions as well, when we're asking if a farmer chooses to plant a new hedgerow, we are recommending that a tree be planted every 50 meters within that hedgerow. So the trees are really important especially for birds. They're used as signposts and as territory markers. They're important for different functions for bird behavior. And they're also incredibly important for insects. With like oak and willow trees, native trees can support over 400 insect species each. And over half of our priority species are associated with hedgerows, are dependent on the hedgerow trees being there too. The next is that the hedgerow itself, well, the greater diversity in hedgerow, then the better it will be for invertebrates and birds. Obviously, the greater variety of herbaceous species and a greater variety of plants, then the greater the biodiversity associated will be in terms of insects and birds as well. And of course, that these native trees and shrubs are far better for wildlife than non-native species, as our native wildlife has adapted to eat them. The hedgerow width, number 3 at the top of the hedge, the height and the width of a hedge are really important. So basically the taller and the wider a hedge is, the much better it is for wildlife, and the greater the abundance of wildlife that will be in it. Larger and more complex hedges provide much better shelter for foraging and nesting birds too, and there's reduced risk of predation of birds that are able to conceal themselves better in thicker, wider, taller hedgerows too. Number 4 is the structural complexity. So how many different layers and different parts are the hedgerow. If it's a very simple hedgerow and it's trimmed all very nice and neatly according to, the farmer just wants it all to look like a box hedge, if you like, in one of those posh gardens, where it's just everything's all just very, very straight lines, etc. It's less good for wildlife then, of course, isn't it? So the different hedge features, that for example, like a song thrush uses several different parts of a hedgerow. So they would nest in the bush of a hedgerow, but they'd sing from the hedgerow trees, and they would eat snails from the base of a hedgerow, and then later on in the season, then they'd be feeding on hedgerow berries. Number 5 is not very clear what that means as connectivity of a hedge, but obviously if a hedge is just there and there's a big gap between it and anything else, a big gap between it and a woodland or the next hedgerow, then there's obviously a blockage there for a lot of wildlife to be, they would use these as wildlife corridors, and they struggle to move, to be able to move to other features in the landscape. The hedge margin is really, really important too. That's why we've recognised that in REAP, and we're rewarding hedgerow margins, but the small margin here, and it can be really, really herb rich as well. And if it's protected from drifting spray and fertiliser, then the herbs that can grow here can be quite significant. So, you know, for your low input grassland fields as well, that going forward, you know, it won't happen in the first year or two perhaps, but like your low input grassland fields now that you're using for REAP, well, you could probably, you know, you would be using those as low input grassland fields going into the next AECM too. So the longer that they're managed like that, the greater the likelihood that species will build up and positive indicator species will be favoured. So by having these margins, it allows you, I suppose, to increase your overall field score as well as getting the score for the margins, because you will have more species associated in these margins as well. And also, by having that any width of margin, even that width there, it helps prevent any destruction to the hedge, and helps protect the root of hedgerows, and that's why we've also asked for the 2 metre gap between the hedge and the start of the crop being sown for the multi-species lay, is to protect the hedgerow rooting structure from cultivation practices. And the last bit then is very similar to 6. It's just a little bit higher maybe than 6. It's really, really important, especially in places in mixed farming areas like here in Wexford, where we have yellowhammers, and they nest in the base of hedges, and they're in that sort of area like 7. It's crucially important to wildlife. Really, really important for nesting birds, including yellowhammer and insects and small mammals. And this part of a hedge, I suppose, is really vulnerable, because when a hedge isn't properly maintained, I mean, this is quickly lost. It could be through grazing or herbicide spraying, or shading as well if the hedge becomes overgrown. So that's just a quick synopsis there on some of the values of hedgerows, and there's a lot more of the value of hedgerows and hedgerow management in the farm information booklet that you all have, and each farmer in the project also has one of those farm information booklets too. So condition A is healthy, dense hedgerow that's managed, but just because it's managed doesn't mean it has to be managed every single year. So it may have been trimmed, or it may not have been trimmed in the past 3 years. It can be really neat and retain its overall basic shape, or it can be quite straggly too, but it's got frequent healthy stems. And I suppose that's probably like the easiest or the quickest way to assess a hedgerow generally, is looking to see, if you can, it's the difficultest time of the year, but to see the density and the frequency of those stems, because often, you know, that you can see a hedge and it doesn't look to be many gaps in it, but there can be like a plant, a hawthorn shrub, and then there could be a gap of 10 or 20 meters before the next hawthorn shrub, and the rest is filled in by bramble or something, and so it all looks like one big dense vegetative layer, and it looks like it's healthy enough. Well, it's not really. The hedge is dying, and you know, hedges do not live indefinitely. They need to be managed throughout their life cycle, but I'm not going into that today. And it should be at least 1.5 meters or more in height. There should be more, really. So birds will nest in hedges over 1.5 meters high. And then examples then of the hedgerows in different condition type. This is from earlier in the season, obviously. This was planted. This is a lot of these are English examples. So in England, that they use a lot more tree guards when they're planting hedgerows, because I think it's because they've got more rabbit problems. So you can still see the remnants of the tree guards, which aren't great because they do lead to toilet brush effect, because if people forget to take off the tree guards, then the hedge doesn't grow until it gets above the level of the tree guards. So this hedgerow is in condition. It is in condition A. It has been well managed, but it's in condition A. As is this one. And this is the line of trees behind the hedgerow is a separate habitat. If you're just looking at the hedgerow in the foreground. This here as well, be condition A. It's hasn't been, it's on its way to becoming a tree line perhaps, and if it continues being, any hedgerow that's unmanaged will eventually grow into a tree line. And this is sort of halfway between the two, but it's condition A. I'd say, well, it doesn't really matter, that if you put that down as condition A and it's condition B or vice versa, it's the same marks are going for both, so it doesn't really matter. And this one is even more so. It's completely, outgrown and unmanaged. Really, really great for wildlife. You can see that it's heavily laden with berries there and different variety of shrubs and lots of different species in there. But it was a planted hedgerow, so it's somewhere between A and B. So then B, when the base of the hedge is shaded out, it does lose its valuable undergrowth. So trees or hedgerows that are in condition A are of better wildlife value and as better wildlife corridors than hedgerows in condition B, and it's because of those things that I mentioned when I was showing the structure of the hedgerow, the base of the hedgerow being important for nesting birds such as yellowhammer. But they're still incredibly important for lots of other reasons, and that these hedgerows that are left, especially where the tops of them are left unmanaged and untopped every year, and they can be side trimmed, but if the tops of them are left untrimmed, they're exceptionally valuable for butterflies and other pollinators, and incredibly important in the countryside. So some examples then of hedgerows in condition B. Hedgerows or tree lines. So it's condition B. So you can see that when this comes into flower, that this will be really valuable for a range of pollinators. But there's no that there is no vegetation here at the base, so it's less good for mammals and for birds that would typically nest in this habitat. However, this can be compensated for by having your field margins in place, because your field margins, of course, will provide up against that hedgerow, will provide a lot of the same function as a hedgerow with a dense base would. Tree line. Tree line. Also, remnant hedges like this one. So remnant hedge like this, it's still valuable for biodiversity, and you would call this hedgerow in condition B. Obviously, where there's gaps like this, if that's as wide as the gaps are, well then, and this extended along the full boundary length, you would simply record this boundary as being a boundary in condition B. If when you're marking this on your field map, and if those gaps extend to 20 meters or more, you would mark that on your map that those gaps, and then when you're digitizing in GLAMS, that you wouldn't digitize the full length of the boundary. And the same for this. That hedge in condition B, it may well stop there at that last tree on the right. And if it does, you just mark in, when you're drawing the boundary features on the map, you just draw in the line where you think that stops in the field. Some more relict hedges here. And as I said, these will greatly benefit from having margins up against them. And lastly, these are what we wish to disincentivize, and it's the severe over trimming and cutting of hedgerows. And by cutting hedgerows back to the same point every year, it's killing the hedge, and it's causing gaps to form in the hedge. So what it does is there's a hard knuckle of scar tissue forms at the tree line from being too frequently cut and too closely trimmed to the same point every year. So there'll be infrequent stems in these because each time that you're cutting back to this level, with when you're cutting hedgerows every year, there's no harm in cutting hedgerows every year in the appropriate season, but that they should be cut incrementally a little bit higher each time. Cutting back to the same level each time kills the hedge. So these hedgerows in condition C, they may be developing mushroom-shaped growth or toilet brush effect, where they lack any branches or foliage in the lower parts. And the base canopy may or may not extend to the ground. So you can see there's a big gap between the base canopy of the hedge and the ground there. But these are so much more easier to see in the winter time, a little bit more trickier this time of the year. So this one, it's not very clear. There's a lot of writing on top of it, but you can see there's not very much of a hedge there at all, is there? The stems are few and far between. They look unhealthy. It's been just filled with bramble and elder and ivy, but it's in need of management, and it's or restorative management, not in need of cutting management. But it's condition C. The same with this here. It's the remnants of a hedge cut too frequently to the same height as what's happened to it. It's dying, and the shrub roots have been badly affected. And the same in this scenario. This says probably through a combination of over trimming and ploughing in the field right up to the base of the hedge, which destroys the roots of the hedge. It's a classic over-trimmed hawthorn hedge. It's lost a few stems and some wide spaces in between, and it's developing that classic toilet brush effect with no vegetation in the base of the hedge. This hedgerow has been over-trimmed, but it hasn't been cut probably in the last year or 2 years. So you can see that it is developing some developing some height and width there. But it's still in condition C. So there's lots of different examples of photographs there for you to refer back to, and to make your own judgment call on too. Every single hedge is different, so it's you just have to get used to looking at them and applying those criteria. But essentially, that it's if it's a tree line, it's B. If it's a hedge that's managed and it's over a metre and a half tall, it's A. And if it's below 1.5 meters tall, and then it's C, because it's been damaged by overcutting. So the last photos to take then for part of the Agrisnap, you've already taken a photo of the field as a representative photo of the field when you come into the field for both LIG, low impact grassland, and for MSL, multi-species lays. You've already taken a photo of each of the margin types in either scorecard scenario, and then you need to take a photograph of each boundary in condition A or B. But only hedgerows and stone walls, so only one photo per condition needed. So a field with 4 boundaries of hedgerow in condition B only requires 1 photo. And it's important for the Agrisnap application that you must be at least 10 meters inside the field to take the photo. Then this question is the last question that I haven't covered on the low input grassland scorecard. Is question 7 on the low input grassland scorecard, and I think it is question 5 on the mixed species, the multi-species lay scorecards. What's the combined cover of negative indicators or species throughout the field margins? So it's back to what I was talking about yesterday, referring to cover. But this is really important now that you would refer to, and I would too, if I was filling out that grassland scorecard, I wouldn't do it, even though I sort of, I know it really well. I've practiced it quite a lot. But you can get mixed up, because yesterday I was talking about when you're looking at cover of positive indicator species, and I said, well, if there's one positive indicator every step, well then you know that it's high cover of positive indicator species. If it's one positive indicator every couple of steps, you know that it's medium. but you're applying different criteria to cover here. You're not applying those criteria. It's not about one every step or every couple of steps. We have tried to simplify it for you as well, because the percentages are so subjective. So rather than, well, is it 21% or is it 29% or 40% of negative indicators, that if you look at the descriptions from negligible to low up to very high, so for example, in medium, it's limited to a few field boundaries or margins only, or occurring in small to medium field patches. And there's quite a high tolerance here, because we do recognise that the value of, you know, some nettles and thistles as well are really beloved by our pollinator species, of incredibly important for wildlife. And having some, they're frequently found around, you know, close to boundary features. So having some there is not going to impact on your score, but it's to stop those encroaching across the rest of the field. Of course, we all know that creeping thistle likes to creep, so it's important to control that, and that's, you know, for a farmer to keep an eye on it. But these negative indicators we're talking about is noxious weeds, typically is docks, ragwort, nettles, bracken and thistles, creeping and spear thistle. They're all shown in the species identification key book. They'll have a red line on those pages to alert you to help you identify those species and tell the difference between some of them, because a lot of the thistles look, you know, quite similar until you get your eye in. And there's also invasive alien species included in this too. So it's Himalayan balsam, Japanese knotweed, giant hogweed, and giant rhubarb. And those 4 species are at the back of the identification for those, the photographs and the description of those is at the back of that plant identification key book too. That's all the questions gone through on both scorecards now. I hope it was clear enough, the fact that it was spread over 2 days and that we did the 2 scorecards. But hopefully you've got your scorecards in front of you, as we asked you to bring to these talks. And we'll be sending you out scorecards again in the post, the card versions of the scorecards in the post next week. And we'll pull all this information together for you into a few pages of a Word document. So how to go through the scorecards in detail, so that it's written there for you to refer to. And there's a video coming up now for you to watch too. Okay, thank you.
There on that presentation, because we have a little test. If you could go into slideshow, please, before I put up the question. Basically, from what you've listened, how would you assess, you've just seen this slide a few minutes ago, how would you assess this hedgerow? What condition is it in? So just ask you to please vote for now. Thanks for your continued engagement on the chat function. We're getting quite a lot of questions, and you've obviously seen a lot of examples in the last presentation. Some of the questions have been answered as we go along. I'm just going to clarify a couple of things maybe that are coming up on the margins in relation to watercourses. You will get credit if the margin is on the other side of a hedgerow, or if it's internal and you put a fence margin along an internal, GLAMS will give you the credit for the bonus mark on that. So either of the sides of the hedge is fine. Internal watercourse is okay. Tara, I suppose, Tara, one question comes up a little bit is the issue of briars, gorse and furze. How do they impact on when scoring a hedge itself? Maybe you might comment on that.
Yes, well, briars, first of all, I probably covered the briars after that question was asked. But there's a lot of briars. So, but there's no harm like the briars been there, but it's just that for you not to make the mistake thinking that that's a hedge there when it isn't a hedge. It could be just a lump of briars, just a lump of scrub at the edge of a field, not a sown hedgerow at all, which is the case in the video that you'll see shortly. And of course, briars can make a hedgerow look healthier than it is, so that it can, there's a lot of the gaps, a hedgerow that is deteriorated. You'd notice this more in the wintertime because the briars wouldn't be grown, and in this time of the year that those gaps are completely filled in by briars. But it's just to be cognizant of that fact, and that there isn't, unless that they, when calculating the density per hectare of hedgerows, that if those gaps in the hedgerow are less than 20 meters, then then you don't need to record them as gaps. It's just that to make a note on your field map that there's a gap there that's longer than 20 meters or around 20 meters. And when you go on to GLAMS, then you can measure it more accurately. And furs, of course, yeah, that's they're fine to they've got their own value. They're not as great as a hedgerow, you know, as a planted hedgerow or a more diverse hedgerow, but they're perfectly fine to put into condition into condition A, unless they have been over trimmed and in really bad condition, then they'd be condition C.
Thanks, Tara. And just to confirm that the correct answer for that last slide was in fact condition C as well. I'm not too sure who's clicking D, because there's no actual D option for the conditions. That was a bit of a trick answer there. Just to confirm as well that field margin, there's some issue, and I think I clarified it yesterday. Roadways don't count for the field margin, so the field margin has to be distinct fenced areas on their own, so that farmers are given credit for basically the income forgone on the newly created field margin. And the condition itself, which Tara referred to, is independent of the length of the hedgerow. So it doesn't matter how long a hedgerow is. If it's in condition C, it doesn't count. So before we move on to the video, I just want to share a slide with you to make a clarification from yesterday. So David, maybe if you can make me a presenter so I can share my screen, just briefly. Okay, I'm just seeing.
There you go, Jerome.
Is that working now, is it?
No, still seeing the answer to the poll at the moment.
Okay, I have to hide the poll first, do I?
Yeah, just close it. Okay, there you go now.
Okay, so I just want to clarify an erratum really on the league scorecard. Everyone can see that. And thanks to Catherine Keena for Eagle Eye for pointing this out. It's in relation to the structure, question 3 on the league scorecard. So for the third category, good, it should read tall, medium and short vegetation throughout, and litter levels less than or equal to 25%. So it's the or is cancelled out and it's an and instead. That's so unfortunately these scorecards are printed, so you'll just have to take note of it, that it's an and here, or when you receive those with the pack.